Imagine you're sitting in a boardroom somewhere in Detroit, Q4. The coffee's gone cold. Someone's droning through a slide deck about aspirational luxury positioning and defending segment share against the usual suspects: Mercedes, BMW, Lucid, Tesla. The usual war, the familiar battlefield. And then someone slides a tablet across the conference table, quietly, deliberately, like they found something they weren't supposed to find. And on that screen is a car, a Chinese car. And nobody in that room says a single word. Not one objection, not one dismissal. Not even the nervous laughter that usually fills the space when someone tries to make a point that makes the room uncomfortable. Just silence. That car is the Maestro S800. And what follows is the story of how a sedan that most Americans will never be allowed to touch just made the most expensive, most celebrated, most self-congratulatory luxury vehicles on the planet look like they've been running on borrowed time. Let's start with what this thing actually is, because the name doesn't prepare you and the photos don't either. The Maestro S800, known in China as the Huawei S800, produced under GAC Ion's ultra-luxury sub-brand, is a full-size flagship electric sedan built with one explicit intention: total category dominance. It is long in the way that only genuinely serious cars are long. Cathedral long, presence long. We're talking a vehicle that stretches past 5 meters with a wheelbase so generous that rear passengers don't sit in the back. They reside there. They are accommodated in a way that most domestic first-class flights quietly envy. This is not a crossover with a premium badge. This is not a sports sedan dressed up for the gala. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded, go-for-the-throat statement aimed directly at the Mercedes S-Class, the BMW 7 Series, the Lucid Air, and at the entire structural assumption that Western brands own this tier of vehicle. The exterior doesn't announce itself the way American performance culture expects. Doesn't growl, doesn't flex. It doesn't need to. The Maestro S800 wears authority the way genuinely powerful things do, without effort and without explanation. There's a fastback silhouette with a flush surface language so refined it looks like someone removed all the noise from the design process and kept only the intention. The front end is wide, low, and carries a full-width light signature that doesn't feel like a styling choice so much as a declaration. When this car materializes behind you in a parking structure at night, those lights cutting through the dark in one clean, unbroken line, you don't think, nice car, you think, who is that? The wheels fill the arches with theatrical completeness. The stance is planted with a gravitational certainty that communicates mass, intelligence, and absolute refusal to apologize for what it is. This car looks like it has already won the argument. You just haven't been told what the argument was yet. Now, the engineering. Because this is where the silence in that Detroit boardroom stopped being surprise and started becoming something closer to dread. The Maestro S800 is built on an 800-volt electrical architecture, and if you follow the EV space with any seriousness, that number lands differently than marketing language does. It's not a headline, it's a physical reality. The 800-volt platform is what separates vehicles that genuinely redefine charging convenience from vehicles that merely claim to. It enables DC fast charging so rapid that the time between arriving at a charger and pulling away again compresses into something that stops feeling like a sacrifice and starts feeling like a stop sign. Brief, unremarkable, forgettable. This is the tier of architecture that Porsche built the Taycan around, that Hyundai engineered the Ioniq 6 platform to support, that Lucid designed the Air to exploit. Except here, it's underneath a vehicle whose Chinese domestic pricing makes those competitors look like they've been charging rent on technology they don't exclusively own. And then there's the extended range version, the EREV variant, which answers the range anxiety conversation not with reassurance, but with finality. An onboard generator that activates when needed seamlessly, without drama, without cabin intrusion. Drive electric the overwhelming majority of the time. And when real-world geography demands more, the system bridges the gap without asking for your permission or your patience. It is the most pragmatic answer to the one objection that still lingers over battery electric vehicles, and China engineered it while American automakers were still hosting panel discussions about consumer confidence. The powertrain in the performance configuration is a tri-motor setup. 3 electric motors. And before that becomes an abstract specification, let me make it physical. 1 motor on the front axle. 2 motors on the rear, individually controllable, individually adjustable, capable of sending different amounts of torque to each rear wheel in milliseconds, with a precision that no mechanical differential can replicate. What this means when you press the accelerator is not violence. It is not the neck-snapping brutality of a car that has power but no manners. It is something more unsettling, a kind of controlled, inevitable surge that arrives immediately, completely, and with a composure that makes the whole experience feel less like acceleration and more like the laws of physics quietly revising themselves in your favor. The tri-motor output places this car directly alongside the Tesla Model S Plaid in raw performance territory. But where the Plaid feels like a weapon, accounts from Chinese roads consistently describe the Maestro S800 as feeling like a decision, precise, intentional, controlled in a way that only something with this level of torque vectoring intelligence can be. Then there's the rear-wheel steering, and this deserves its own moment, because on a car this size, it is genuinely transformational. At low of automobile, feel almost implausibly nimble. Pull into a narrow city street, slide into an underground parking space that would make a lesser car sweat. The physics that govern this vehicle in those moments are fundamentally different from what the length should allow. At highway speeds, the geometry reverses, rears turning in the same direction as the fronts, and the car settles into lane changes with a solidity that doesn't feel like engineering. Feels like the road is holding the car steady rather than the car holding the road. BMW offers this in the 7 Series. Mercedes builds it into the S-Class. Both charge accordingly. The Maestro S800 delivers it and then has the audacity to cost less than either. And then there's Huawei. This is where the story stops being about automotive engineering and starts being about something that makes certain governments profoundly uncomfortable. The Maestro S800 runs Huawei's ADS 3.0, Advanced Driving System 3rd generation, and it is not a driver assistance suite in the way that phrase is typically used. It is not lane keep and adaptive cruise dressed up with a futuristic name. A DS 3.0 is a LiDAR-fused, camera-fused, radar-fused autonomous driving system that operates, and this is the part that should stop every American tech executive mid-sentence, without HD map dependency in a growing number of real-world scenarios. That distinction matters at a foundational level. Map-dependent autonomous systems are geographically caged. They require constant data maintenance. They hesitate at construction zones, new interchanges, altered road layouts. A system that navigates without pre-mapped data is operating at a categorically different tier of spatial reasoning. It is reading the world rather than recalling it. Tesla's full self-driving uses a vision-only approach. Cameras interpreting the environment, no LiDAR. Huawei's ADS 3.0 uses fusion. Cameras, radar, and LiDAR working as a unified perceptual system, each modality covering the blind spots of the others. In complex urban environments, dense intersections, unprotected left turns, multi-lane merges, parking structures with inconsistent lighting, every account from Chinese roads, from independent journalists, from owners putting real kilometers on this system describes something that is not just capable, but confident. Unhesitatingly, naturally, disconcertingly confident. The kind of confidence that makes you forget the system is there at all, which is exactly what genuine autonomous capability feels like when it's ready. Huawei built this, the company that was removed from American telecommunications infrastructure, the company that was sanctioned, restricted, treated as a national security concern by the United States government. That company built the autonomous intelligence that now sits inside this car and is, by the accounts of the people actually using it, pressing hard against the ceiling of what Tesla and GM and Ford have been selling American consumers as the frontier. Think about that for exactly as long as it takes to become uncomfortable. Now let's go inside. Because if the engineering story made the room go quiet, the cabin is what made people put their phones face down. Stepping into the rear of the Maestro S800 in executive configuration is not the experience of entering a car. It is the experience of arriving somewhere. The space receives you. The ambient lighting, layered, warm, architectural, adjusts to the time of day and the context of your journey without being asked. The rear seat reclines to a position that erases the distinction between rest and travel, not airline recline. Not the performative lean of a business jet seat pretending to be flat, genuinely, structurally flat, the kind of position where an hour disappears and you arrive at your destination not fatigued by transit, but restored by it. The individual rear screens, high resolution, touch responsive, context aware, would be considered remarkable in a living room. In a car, at this price point, they are the new standard that everyone else now has to justify not matching. The materials are not described with elaborate names designed to distract from mediocrity. There is no Napa-adjacent leather or real wood-inspired veneer. What's in this cabin is what's in this cabin. Hand-finished surfaces, genuine material quality, acoustic ceiling so comprehensive that the exterior world doesn't fade when you close the door. It ceases. Wind, road, mechanical. The entire audio environment outside the glass simply stops being relevant. The sound system fills that silence with a listening experience that uses the cabin's own architecture as part of its acoustic design. Speakers positioned not just for coverage, but for imaging. Soundstage in a moving room. The kind of audio environment that makes you reconsider whether you actually needed a home theater. The suspension is adaptive and connected directly to the vehicle's AI processing. What this means in practice is that the car does not react to road imperfections. It prepares for them. Camera data reads the surface ahead, signals the adaptive dampers, and the system preemptively adjusts before the wheel encounters what it has already seen. The result is not just a comfortable ride, it is a ride that feels considered, intentional, as though the road itself has been curated for your specific journey. Rolls-Royce calls their version of this magic carpet ride and charges Rolls-Royce money for the sensation. The Maestro S800 delivers something indistinguishable from that experience without requiring you to enter a different tax bracket to access it. And this, precisely this, is where the pricing conversation becomes something more than a comparison exercise. This is where it becomes an indictment. A Mercedes S-Class in meaningful specification, AMG line, executive rear package, the kind of build that an actual S-Class buyer selects, runs north of $120,000 in the American market. The Maybach variant, which is what Mercedes reaches for when it wants to charge you for the mythology layered on top of the engineering, starts approaching $200,000 and climbs from there with a flexibility that seems almost aggressive. The BMW 7 Series crosses six figures with serious specification. The Lucid Air Grand Touring, which is genuinely excellent and deserves genuine respect, sits in the same territory. The Tesla Model S Plaid, which remains the performance reference point for American electric luxury, runs around $90,000. The Maestro S800, in its Chinese domestic market pricing, sits at a figure that, converted honestly and without manipulation into US dollars, represents what American consumers would consider mid-size luxury territory. Not flagship, not the flagship of the flagship, not price available upon request. It is priced with the calm, calculated confidence of a company that knows its cost structure, understands its product quality, and has chosen to do something that legacy automakers genuinely never anticipated from this direction. Deliver more vehicle, more technology, more experience for fundamentally less money. That gap is not a competitive advantage. It is an exposure. It tears back the curtain on decades of pricing architecture built on the assumption that no credible alternative existed. The brand tax, the heritage premium, the geography surcharge disguised as exclusivity. The Maestro S800 didn't negotiate with that structure. It walked in and invalidated it. Now I need you to sit with something uncomfortable. If you're watching this from the United States, you cannot buy this car. There is no dealership. There is no import pathway that makes practical sense. The tariff environment surrounding Chinese manufactured vehicles has constructed a financial wall that makes importation economically irrational for the overwhelming majority of buyers. And that wall has been reinforced at the policy level with the explicit intention of keeping it exactly where it is. Beyond tariffs, the FMVSS compliance requirements, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, create a regulatory ceiling that Chinese manufacturers, whose domestic market is enormous and whose export ambitions are currently focused elsewhere, have zero commercial incentive to clear. They are not locked out of America. America locked itself in. And the person paying the price for that decision, quietly, without acknowledgement, is the American consumer who now drives past a dealership selling a $120,000 S-Class and has no idea what they're not being offered as an alternative. That is not a trade policy. That is a tax on consumer choice, and it is being levied in silence. North of the border, the conversation is different. And if you are American and you have ever driven through Canada and quietly envied something you can't quantify, this might be the source. Canadian regulatory frameworks, import provisions for low volume and specialty vehicles, and the institutional knowledge of brokers who understand the customs process have created a narrow but navigable pathway for buyers who are determined enough to use it. It is not a dealership experience. There is no showroom in Toronto with Maestro S800 flags in the window. But there are people, right now, today, who have done the research, engaged the right professionals, cleared the paperwork, and are driving these cars on Canadian roads in complete legal compliance, quietly, without announcement. The kind of ownership that doesn't need validation because the vehicle itself provides all the validation required. That is the specific variety of envy that sits in my chest as an American who followed this process and hit a wall that my Canadian counterpart simply walked around. 4 hours north, same continent, completely different access to the future of automotive technology. That asymmetry is going to become harder to ignore the more people become aware of what's on the other side of it. The American auto industry's traditional defenses against this kind of disruption, brand heritage, dealer infrastructure, service network loyalty, cultural familiarity, are not nothing. They have genuine value, but they are defensive value. They hold ground, they do not gain it, and when the product on the other side of the argument is this sophisticated, this comprehensive, this undeniably real, defensive positioning becomes a question of timeline rather than outcome. How long does brand mythology hold against a vehicle that a sophisticated buyer gets in, experiences for 10 minutes, and then looks at the competition with fundamentally revised expectations? Tesla is the most complicated case here because Tesla has been having the right conversation. Software as the product, over-the-air improvement, autonomous capability as a genuine commercial differentiator. But the Huawei ADS 3.0 integration in the Maestro S800 challenges Tesla's software positioning on Chinese soil specifically, which is a market where Tesla has invested enormous commercial energy. Chinese buyers, who previously had to choose between Tesla's software sophistication and a domestic luxury interior, now have a single vehicle that offers both, with deeper AI integration, a more mature cabin, and a price argument that Tesla cannot match from its current cost structure. Tesla has noticed the internal urgency in Fremont and Shanghai is not invisible. Mercedes has noticed. BMW has noticed. They've been accelerating China-specific development programs, forming local software partnerships, adjusting their product velocity in ways that are visible if you read the corporate strategy documents rather than the press releases. But they face an inherent structural problem. They are trying to compete with the Maestro S800 in China while simultaneously managing the reputational impact of its existence everywhere else, because this vehicle's presence in the market changes the consumer conversation globally, even in markets where it isn't sold. Makes people ask, for the first time with genuine credibility, backed by genuine evidence, what exactly am I paying for that I couldn't access elsewhere for less? That question, once asked with real data behind it, does not return to silence. The onboard platform, Huawei's Harmony OS automotive stack, deserves one final moment of attention because it illustrates the philosophical difference between what this car represents and what Western automotive software culture has been building. Harmony OS in this context is not an infotainment system that controls navigation and plays music. It is a unified operating environment where the vehicle's driving intelligence, its cabin experience, its connectivity, its personalization systems, and its over-the-air update architecture all operate within a single coherent framework. Updates don't patch bugs. They add capabilities. They expand what the vehicle can do after you've taken delivery. The car you own in year 3 is meaningfully, measurably more capable than the car you took delivery of in year 1. and that improvement arrives without a service appointment, without a software fee, without a visit to anyone. This is software as a living relationship with the owner rather than software as a compliance checkbox on a delivery document. Western automakers, with the partial exception of Tesla, have largely treated software as a feature layer applied over a mechanical product. The Maestro S800 treats the mechanical product as the hardware substrate for a software-defined experience. The difference between those two philosophies is not incremental, it is structural, and it is the same difference that separated Nokia from Apple in 2007, which is a comparison that should make every automotive executive who remembers that transition deeply, viscerally uncomfortable. There will be objections. There are always objections. Service network, resale value, crash test ratings from American bodies, brand trust built over decades. These are not fabricated concerns. They carry real weight in a real purchasing decision. But every single one of these objections was raised about Japanese vehicles entering the American market in the 1970s. Every single one was raised about Korean vehicles in the 1990s. And every single time, the industry doing the objecting eventually found itself humbled, then restructured, then chasing the very segment it had dismissed with the very arguments it had deployed as defenses. The pattern doesn't change, only the nameplate does. The only question worth asking now is whether anyone in the American automotive establishment is watching the Maestro S800 with the intellectual honesty to understand what it actually represents, or whether they're running the same slide deck, in the same boardroom, with the same cold coffee, waiting for a disruption that is already in progress to somehow pause and wait for them to be ready. It will not wait. The Maestro S800 didn't arrive on a cargo ship looking for approval. It didn't apply for American certification. It didn't seek Western validation from journalists or regulatory bodies or legacy industry analysts. It arrived in China, on Chinese roads, in the driveways of buyers who had looked at every alternative the world had to offer, the S-Class, the 7 Series, the Lucid, the Plaid, and made a different choice, deliberately, informedly, confidently. 3 motors, 800 volts, Huawei's autonomous intelligence reading the road in real time, a rear cabin that makes stillness feel like an event, pricing that turns the luxury premium into a question rather than a given, and a presence, a physical, visual, undeniable presence that doesn't ask to be taken seriously, simply is serious, and the industry that built its entire identity around the assumption that no one else could reach this level. That industry is not confused right now. Confusion would be manageable. What they're experiencing is something they haven't felt in decades: recognition, the specific, stomach-dropping recognition that the rules of the game just change, that the car that changed them isn't even allowed to cross the American border, and that none of their existing answers are sufficient to address what's coming next. The Maestro S800 didn't shut up the American auto industry by arguing with it. It shut it up the way genuinely transformative things always do, by simply existing, fully formed, at a level that renders the previous conversation irrelevant. Some cars make headlines, some cars win awards, some cars shift segments. And then, once in a generation, a car arrives that doesn't compete with the category. It reclassifies it. It makes everything that came before it answer for itself. This is that car. And the silence it created in that Detroit boardroom, that silence isn't ending. It's spreading.